somebody talking about systems versus goals.
Yeah.
So system is like a thing you do every day.
Yeah.
Whereas a goal is something I'll do this one day.
Right.
And it's really hard to have a goal and be like, well, how the hell do I even get there? But a system is like, well, I get up every day. I'm going to draw something, or I'll write a comic, or I'll write a page, or I'll write a strip, or I'll design this thing, or.
Right.
And that's the thing that you sort of that gets you through the days and weeks and months and years. And it was never about like trying to. I mean, it was to an extent because you want like recognition and you want people to think you're like a great creative genius and be a billionaire, of course. Yeah. But it's not really why you do it. You just did it because you loved it, and that was the only thing I knew how to do. Podcast-wise, I'm always more worried about sound than anything.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we're also we're in front of a public park as well, so inevitably there's going to be kids screaming and people walking by and potentially a lawnmower.
It's like a nice backdrop, though, hearing kids laugh.
Yeah,
absolutely. It could be worse.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you doing this, man. I appreciate you taking the time.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Sorry I wasn't able to do it sooner.
No,
it's been a bit chaotic.
I think people have their lives, and I heard you got married.
Yes, I just did. Yeah,
congrats.
Thank you very much.
Nice,
it was it's pretty intense.
Marshall told me it was like a whole thing. Like,
what did he tell you?
Like hundreds of people. It was. It's like, Yeah, it was cool.
It was decent. Cool. Yeah, it was fun. I was glad that he was able to come.
Yeah.
It was, you're not married. Well, obviously, if you're living in a van, I assume that you're not.
No.
Unless you've got a very understanding partner who's just like, you go live in the van, it'll be totally fine.
Yeah, be homeless, it's fine.
Yeah, I'll see you when I see you. But no, it's a pretty amazing experience once it actually happens.
Yeah.
But the lead up to it was just like, it's just chaos, all the time. And
well, I'm 27 now, and I'm getting to the age where a bunch of my childhood friends are all getting married.
They're starting to get married, starting to have kids.
It's odd. I mean, you see the events, and you see the scale of it, and you see, like, the implication of marriage, obviously, is that it's a lifetime thing.
Yeah.
People are kind of settling into the rest of their lives at this point.
Yeah.
Existentially, it's kind of weird.
It is, but, I'm 39, so I took quite a long time to like jump on that wagon, so to speak. So you got plenty of time.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
It's not really. I think I remember feeling something like that when I was younger, being like, "Oh, I'm fucking up," and I'm.
Yeah.
You gotta swear on this, right?
Oh yeah.
I swear a lot. So.
And,
yeah, I understand. Relatable.
Well, a big part of this podcast has a lot to do with identity and balancing life and balancing career and balancing just how do you be a creative person and also pursue something like marriage or having a family.
Sure. Yeah.
And make it financially viable and also make it something that's worth doing and still fun,
The marriage or the creative
well,
part?
like both. I guess both, Yeah.
I'm barely married a month, so I'll get back to you on like whether or not I can make it all work.
Yeah. Well, still though. I think you must have been with your partner for a while, right?
Sarah and I have been together for, let's see, it'll be 9 years in the spring.
Crazy.
So quite a long time.
Awesome. Yeah.
It helps that she's creative as well. So she works as a graphic designer. She's part of the Art Directors Guild, and she's like in the film union and stuff. So she has like a real job. So that's been helpful in terms of understanding the struggles of creatively. You have her ups and downs. When we first met, I think I was making more money than she was, and then now she's been making more money than me the past couple of years, and it's sort of like whatever. You got ebbs and flows, and it's like, as long as you're sort of supportive of each other, somewhat unconditionally, I think that's. I mean, again, I'm not like an expert. I haven't been married that long, but like, I feel like that's been a pretty crucial part of our relationship. Is just not just saying you do what you want, but really believing in what the other person's doing and admiring them and respecting their craft and sort of being. A champion for them in a way.
Yeah, well, I've heard from a lot of people that successful marriages has a lot more to do with sacrifice and kind of like almost killing the ideal of it being 100% sunshine and roses all the time.
Yeah.
I've
heard that too.
It's not like once you get married, you figure it out. The love of your life. Then it's
a process.
Yeah.
You're always. I think there was this. Chris Rock. I've mentioned this before on my podcast, but the last stand-up he did is called Tambourine.
Yeah.
And the whole show sort of revolves around this one gag where he talks about how his marriage fell apart and got divorced and it was hard. And he said, being married is like playing in a band. And he said, like, if sometimes you're going to be the lead singer and sometimes you're going to be playing tambourine. Yeah. And he said, you don't want to be, no one wants to go to a concert and see a tambourine player who's like, all like sad and depressed and like pissed off that they have to play tambourine. You got to play like the fuck out of that thing. He's like, you got to... and he's like, that's how you got to think about. That's how you have to think about it. Is like whatever role you're in, you you're the band. Like that's the thing that matters.
Well, I feel like there might be a lot of parallels between that and just being a professional creative person in terms of like, if you have your own podcast, you're creating your own books or IP. A lot of it is like a lot of this podcast for me is just editing, or uploading files or.
Like stuff, just like the kind of grunt work.
Yeah, the grunt work. Yeah. Most of it is actually pretty boring.
That's most of what you do, I think, creatively.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, your creative work doesn't take up as much time as you think. It's a lot more.
Yeah.
It's a lot more. I hate this word, but like nuts and bolts, really, more than anything. Even drawing is just like, drawing is fun. Obviously, I love it. It's like the thing I've committed my life to. But most of it is just problem solving and just being like, how do I draw this one thing over and over again to make it look correct? And then as the composition work, it's very like. Mechanical in a way. Yeah.
Well, and from the outside looking in, it might be something that is fundamental. Like, oh man, that guy is drawing for a living. It's so much more fun than being an accountant, or so much more fun. Than,
it might be. I don't know, unless you're really into accounting. I think
but it's like the grunt work of drawing can be as tedious as accounting as well.
Yeah, like I think most of it is just like it's a job. At the end of the day, it's a job. I think there's a lot of. I watch a lot of like YouTube interviews and I listen to like commentaries. I used to listen to a lot more of them. And like people tend to get really flowery in their language when they talk about like the creative process and like filmmaking or drawing. It's just all kind of like you got to get up, you got to do the job. Some days you suck, some days you're good.
Right.
If you have more days where you don't suck, then you'll get hired and then you'll get more money and it's basically it. Like it's just really just like any other. It's not like any other job, but you kind of have to think about it.
Yeah, and I feel like the more you're able to get over the grind versus like trying to do the big thing, like have a big hit. Like having a big hit might make you successful in a very short run, but it's not necessarily sustainable. Whereas learning to love like the day to day, just drawing a simple thing, that is. Like over 40 years, that'll have a much bigger impact over your life versus, a big YouTube video or something.
Yeah, it's like about system. I can't remember where I read this, but it was somebody talking about systems versus goals.
Yeah.
So system is like a thing you do every day.
Yeah.
Whereas a goal is something I'll do this one day.
Right.
And it's really hard to have a goal and be like, well, how the hell do I even get there? But a system is like, well, I get up every day. I'm going to draw something, or I'll write a comic, or I'll write a page, or I'll write a strip, or I'll design this thing, or.
Right.
And that's the thing that you sort of. That gets you through the days and weeks and months and years, and that's the thing that you have to really love. And that's ultimately like the thing I did when I was a kid anyway.
Yeah.
So that's why overcomplicate it? You know what I mean? You gotta just kind of keep doing that shit, and if it works out, it works out. But it was never about like trying to. It was to an extent because you want like recognition and you want people to think you're like a great creative genius and be a billionaire, of course, but. It's not really why you do it. You just did it because you loved it, and that was the only thing I knew how to do.
Yeah, well, and I feel like a lot of success for me is it's like reframing the problem.
Yeah,
like reframing the idea of like if you do a post and it doesn't get as many likes as you want, you could see that either as a failure or a success because you made a post. You created something.
Yeah.
And it's corny and it's like a cliche of life advice, but you miss 100% of the shots you don't take.
Sure, yeah. I also think posts are like a very. I'm sure I'm not the first person to say this on this podcast, or it's like it's sort of been this poison that has really like fucked with everyone's heads and made them sort of become slaves to this weird algorithm that like nobody knows what the hell it is and it always changes, and it's been really quite destructive. So
well, the odd part about all that is how everybody agrees on that. Every single person agrees that it's this weird poison, and
and yet you can't escape it.
You can't
that's
escape
the fucked up part is like you really are beholden to it. You really are kind of trapped in that system. And certain people manage to break through because they're just sort of an amazing talent, or they've had some other means where people will sort of see it. But that's a lot of what tends to occupy my thinking in terms of stories and stuff, is like how we're very, I don't really believe in this idea that like, the Terminator, like AI is going to become sentient and like make us destroy ourselves. I think it's already happening. Right. Like we're in the midst of it. Like it's just not like a robot that you can physically see. It's these, these
Mid-Journey or
there's these algorithms or like these weird programs and codes that sort of get us to hate each other and want to murder each other based on political beliefs or whether or not you like this thing or that thing. So that's a much darker area for me to go to. But
the thing is it's true. You can see it happening in real time.
Yeah,
and I feel like it's really easy nowadays to be really nihilistic about saying anything online.
True. Yeah.
It's really easy to talk yourself into the thing you're saying not being important.
Or at least, or the opposite of thinking that like every single thought that's crossed your mind is somehow like the most important thing that everybody needs to hear. Like,
Yeah.
it's sort of broken down that wall of any kind of rationality of being like, gives a shit. Why do I like this is not important for me to share? Like,
Yeah. Well, I've talked to a lot of people on this podcast as well, and like everyone I've talked to is like, you just do the work. You don't even think about the final result.
Yeah.
I mean, you have to a degree because you have to pay the bills and you have to.
you're talking about doing creative work.
Yeah, doing creative work.
Yeah.
You know, like, but just doing it over a long period of time, and the less you can focus on those problems, I think the more focus you'll be able to put towards the problems that, like, the creative problems you want to solve.
Yeah.
And as a result, you're, like you said, you're gonna get paid more money and be more successful.
Yeah.
You know?
I'll get back to you on if I get paid a lot of money at any point, but you know, that's what I'm trying for anyway.
Yeah. Well, so
yeah.
like, you know, I read a little bit about you online, and we met at WonderCon.
Yes, it was just this past year, right? It was
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, so your creative endeavors, it's Perma Friends in your books, and
Yeah.
Do you want to talk a little bit about the stuff you do?
Sure. So, Perma Friends is a graphic novel series I started a few years ago.
Yeah.
The sort of short premise of it is it's a comedy about what happens when humans go extinct and then animals and robots inherit the earth. And a lot of the gags come from what happens when you're not there when humans aren't there to explain why the fuck we did any of the things that we did.
Yeah.
And like how that can sort of get reinterpreted in weird, bizarre ways. Sort of like now that everyone looks back at like the pyramids and they're like, did aliens do this? Or like, you know, or like what were dinosaurs like? And just finding out that dinosaurs were actually birds. You know, there's all these things that like we're so far removed from. And it's funny to think about like, what if these societies or these animals that used to live had like a totally different way of engaging that we had no idea about? That's sort of, and you extrapolate on that, but you know, make us be the people who are extinct. Yeah. And then it focuses on the core three characters, which is Esteban, who's this penguin who escaped from the poles because they were melting, and he's like a survivalist. He's got like the goggles and the boots, and he's like, you know, lives his life in solitude. And then there's Byron, who's a snowman who's born out of the last nuclear blast, and he's just sort of this laid-back kind of fun guy. And then Harpo is the third character, who's this ad bot. So he's roamed the earth for 1,000 years trying to find humans to sell ads to, but they're not around anymore.
Yeah, right.
And so the series starts off with the three of them meeting in the first chapter and accidentally deprogramming Harpo's, ad tendencies because Esteban's this person, you know, and they're all kind of these facets of me where I'm like, Esteban's this person who's like, oh, I don't want to have any cookies track me. I don't agree to this. He rejects all the user agreements. And Harpo's like, no one's ever rejected the user agreement before, like in my entire span of doing this. And it sort of like throws him off. And then he's finally like free of that. But I also thought that character was funny because he's like this robot that has all the information in the world, like all the data that he's acquired, but he has no personal experiences with it. So in many ways, I feel like that's how a lot of us have grown up, is like you have all this information that you've read on the internet, and you know, we've all done like 10 million hours of going down a Wikipedia rabbit hole, and you have access to all this information, yet you have no personal experience with any of it. So I think it's like a funny premise to have, and you know, there's a lot that you can sort of draw out from that. And having these three kind of voices is a lot of fun to write and do these books. So I finished a couple of them so far.
Nice.
I've written 6, but I draw them and ink them and color them, and so it takes me forever to do it. But I finished the second one in terms of getting it published over the summer, and and they have progressively gotten longer as I've written them because the stories have become more ambitious. So I don't know. I'll probably be spending like next 15 years trying to finish these things.
Yeah, that's awesome though. I don't know. Well, I like a thing I want to talk about with people is like like why is it important to do, and how do you like? I think a lot of people have really good ideas. I think that's a really good idea.
Thank you.
And I think generally the thing that I struggle with most is like not necessarily the ideas I have, but like committing enough to it to actually execute on it. You know?
Yeah.
And to like again deal with the tedium of, you know, like for you it's like drawing a thing, editing it, like dealing with actually printing the books, going to conventions, trying to sell them, like all these different things. And like it's not necessarily like obvious to me why it's important to do that in the first place. You know?
I don't know, honestly.
Well,
I kind of just do it, but I think my age probably has something to do with it. Yeah. I think, you know, like I said, I'm 39. You're 27. You said, So I think I hit a point in my early 30s where I was like, oh fuck, like what have I done? Like what have I done anything really? And or you know, and I had, but I hadn't really done anything that I was like truly had been proud of, that I felt like was and you know, I'm sure you've talked to plenty of people about this, which is like trying to figure out what your voice is and failing over and over and over again and trying to write stories and scripts and make these short films or long films or feature films or whatever, and feeling like I hadn't really, particularly because my background's in illustration, but then I also went into live action, and you know, I've been in film for, I don't know, 10, 15 years now too, since I've moved to LA, so I kind of have a curse in a weird way where I'm like, I have these different things that I pull from, and it's hard to sort of put them all into like one project that I can focus on. You know, it's very easy for me to get sidetracked on each project that I do that allows me to sort of express one part of myself, but maybe not all of them together. And so I think when I was doing these books specifically, the impetus of it, what sparked it, aside from the subject matter of like, you know, what I was trying to express, is sort of, I liked that it was something that I could draw. I liked that it was something that I could color, or that I could ink, that I could. I found that it had a lot of the skill sets that I had acquired over the years. Yeah. I could sort of pour them all into one thing. Yeah. And I think I liked that. It was something I was proud of. You know what I mean? That I could write and I could draw as well. Writing was the other part of it that was very important. But and writing and drawing together was an interesting thing that I had never really done before that. Oddly enough. Yeah. I had drawn, or I'd written, but I'd never combined the two of them into like one thing, and that's sort of what made me fall in love with that medium, because I loved comics as a kid. Yeah. But I always thought about it as like, well, I draw, so I didn't really think about. Yeah. I did think about how you would write a story, but I don't know. My life's weird. Like, there's all these things where I'm like, for some reason, something had never occurred to me that seems really obvious, but I was like, oh yeah, I guess I should probably try that. Yeah.
Well, I guess part of this podcast for me is like almost a version of asking permission from the world to start my own things. Like, I want to talk to as many creative people as possible just to see like what like is the justification for them to go like make a beautiful painting, or in your case make a comic and a podcast, versus like being an accountant where you could theoretically make more money and, you know, it'd be more efficient financially. But, you know, and the general consensus is like, don't wait. Like, just do it, you know? Like,
it's easier said than done, though.
Well, for sure.
Yeah. I think you need to sort of have... I think there's like a very big emotional component to it that people don't tend to talk about. Right. Which is like... And for obvious reasons, because you're like, well, I don't want to sit here and tell you about like all the... It's not a therapy session necessarily, but there are things that in my life that led me to, like I said, sort of a crisis of like, what the fuck? Like, what am I doing? What have I... You know, and that you can spiral very easily, you know, at that age, or you can sort of... And I was like, thankfully going to therapy at that point, and I had a really nice therapist who was very supportive and didn't try to like push me into one way or another. He sort of let me talk it through, and I realized I was like, I felt like I had sort of wanted to do this when I was younger, but I never really... I was at a period where I was feeling like I hadn't finished anything that I really believed in, and I was looking back at like over the years and years and years that like, oh, I should have finished this at this point. And it was like sort of going back to like when I was younger, and I was like, well, I'm just going to do this as an exercise. Yeah. As a way to sort of make myself feel better. And you should see these early sketches that I have of these books. Like, they're a disaster. They're so bad, because I was like, it's weird how it's even scary. I don't know if you feel this, but even in your own sketchbook, you're just like judging myself.
Oh, absolutely.
For a thing that no one's going to see, that I'll never show to anybody. And yet I still, and that's fucked up. Like, you shouldn't do that. You should be able to just, that's what your sketchbook's for. It's supposed to be this place where you see but there's this weirdness where you see your limitations, you know, and you're sort of coming directly face to face with it, and that's hard. Yeah. Because in your head, it's like this beautiful, incredible, elaborate, you know, artistically beautiful thing where I'm like, you know, Leonardo da Vinci and Michelangelo, and like all these people like combined into one, and then your hand starts doing it, and you're like, oh shit, that's not what it
this is
like.
Horrible. Yeah.
So it was a lot of just like allowing myself to, I'd just be like, I'm never going to show this to anyone. I might even just throw this thing away when it's done. But it was just to do it to sort of, because I was tired of that feeling, of that insecurity, and I was like, I'm going to work through this insecurity by doing this. Right. And I had no expectations of it. Yeah. And I had no idea what it was going to be. I never even thought I was going to make it into anything. It was just like it was almost like a therapeutic exercise. Yeah. Right. And I managed to finish a book, which I was like, oh, that's weird. Yeah. And again, in this really awful, terrible, crude, really, I can't express how ugly it was. You know, it was literally just pen and ink, too. I was just literally drawing, like, I just drew a grid with ink and drew it, and then drew the word bubbles and scribbled it out. It's chicken scratch. It makes no sense, but it made sense to me. And I was like, I wonder if I can do it again.
Yeah.
And I did another one, and I was like, I wonder if I can do it again. So I did it.
Yeah.
So like over the course of a couple of years, I ended up, like I said, writing 5 or 6 of them.
Yeah.
It just sort of kept coming, and I was like, oh, okay, well, I guess that was really helpful to confront this insecurity that I had, and then sort of use this process that I've sort of perfected now over the course of a few years. Not perfected, but I've become comfortable with, you know, getting better at it, where I was like, it's very therapeutic in that sense, where it sort of allows me to deal with this block that I have, you know, and I think that's, more broadly speaking, like people who have like art block, or, you know, they're having trouble coming up with it. It's usually always some weird emotional thing. In my experience anyway, it's like some shit that you're like, you got to figure out this other thing. That's why this is happening. It's not like you've necessarily run out of creative ideas. You've just haven't lived enough life, or you need to pull from something, or you need to confront your, I don't know, your partner or your mom or your cousin or whatever. You know what I mean? There's those things like going back to your original question about like living a married life, for example, in addition to creative life. It's not separate. It's always the same. Not same. They're always parallel. One informs the other in some way. So as long as you're as much, and again, this is just my experience, but the more I feel like I work towards being a better person in my personal life and in my relationships, the more that informs the creative work, not directly, but just because it sort of opens up these other parts, and then vice versa. It's like then I get excited about a project, and then I'm happier, and then I'm like nicer to the people around me, and I'm not a crabby piece of shit like sometimes I can get. So you know, therapy's good.
I think therapy. I think everyone should go to therapy. I think the people that need therapy most are generally the people that don't.
Want to go to it. I was late on that train, unfortunately. I wish I had gone. And that's the other thing. Now I'm like, fuck. If I had just gone, you know, when I was your age or a little bit younger, I was like, I could have solved myself so much headache. But you also have to be ready for it. Yeah. You can't just go and not take it. I mean, not take it seriously, but like you have to be open, ready for that change, and willing to sort of accept the challenges that it gives you, and to also realize like it's a lot of work. It's not just going to therapy and being like, oh, I'm gonna cry about my childhood and then go home. It's like you get shit to think about, and you got to sort of work at it, and it's not fucking easy, you know. Yeah,
well, you need to want to be a better person.
Yeah,
which I think it's really hard.
Yeah.
Like I like sometimes being lazy. You know, I like being destructive. It's awesome. Like
it's great.
Eating Ben and Jerry's and playing video games.
Yeah.
Dude, that's the best. But can't do that every day. Otherwise,
no. I mean, it's okay for like a reward every once in a while. You know, because you also need solitude. You know, you need to be able to just sort of decompress and not think about everything all the time. And I think that's normal. I think it's healthy. It's just a matter of how many days in a row you do it.
Yeah. I guess balance is always
balance is always the key. That's always what you want.
Yeah. Well, I guess going back to the creativity thing.
Yeah.
Like, I feel like a lot of art students. I guess my target audience right now technically is like art students, and I think generally art education online like puts like this hustle culture in like the hustle culture as the only way of becoming successful, like in terms of like, you know, you have to do 12 hours of master studies a day for 5 years in order to even have a chance at saying the things you want to say. Whereas like from what I can tell, like the like I don't want to say real, but and it's not necessarily the only way, but like starting even with the skills that you have is way better than waiting 10 years to feel like you've earned the right to be able to say it, you know?
What are you saying, though, is the question, right?
Yeah.
What are you trying to say? Why? Right. What's stopping you from saying that?
Well, and I think preparation.
Or just generally, not you. I mean.
Me?
Yeah. Do you have like a thing that you're trying to, like, do you want to write a book, for example?
I do want to write a book.
And so what's stopping you?
It's fear. And it's
fear of failure or judgment of others.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I think that's a totally human thing to feel, but it's also like, you know, again, from a therapy side, like why does those opinions matter so much? Like why wait, you know? Why is it so bad to do something badly, you know?
I think it's just kind of like going back to, like I said earlier, like what I see up here versus what I can.
Right.
It's not so much to me as much as failure or fear of like other people judging me. It's just like, oh, this is another thing, by the way, like something to look out for when you're younger that I've sort of figured out as I've gotten older. There's a lot of danger in wrapping your whole identity in being a creative person or an artist, because if you draw something poorly, that means you failed at being an artist, which means you failed at being a person. Yeah. And like that's not healthy. Like you need to figure out a way to, not just you, I just mean in general.
Like, all you.
All of us. Yeah, myself as well. I'm not like, oh, I know what I'm doing. Like, it's something like that. I just mean the more you sort of allow yourself to be multifaceted as well. Like part of the thing that I really enjoyed when I went into film was, at least for a time, and then after a while I got sick of it, was that like people didn't even know that I could draw.
Yeah.
And it was a really weird, refreshing thing for me to be like, oh, I have these other skills that I had never realized that I had, because I never allowed myself to develop these skills, because so much of what my focus was, you know, just, can I draw this? Can I draw this? Does this look right? Can I draw this? Blah, 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 you know, whatever that whole chase ends up being. So you kind of have to detach in a way.
Yeah.
But it's also, what I was saying is like facing yourself and realizing what your own limitations are, and then being okay with that. Like, that's hard.
Well, and loving yourself versus the ideal.
Yes.
You know? I saw a Carl Jung quote today. It was something like, if you don't know who you are, the world will show you, you know?
Yeah.
And it's like, you know, it's okay to be bad at things. And it's okay to, like, you know, and maybe that's the only way you can be. Maybe, like, somebody, like, they will never get good at drawing, but that does not diminish their value as a human being.
I mean, not to be too philosophical, but like, what does it mean to be good at drawing or bad at drawing? Like, those are the, like, I had a period when I got out of school, when I got out of undergrad, when I would still go to life drawing. Yeah. And I love life drawing. I was like obsessed with it. It's all I did, and it was really fun for me, and I still love it. But I remember sort of going somewhat obsessively still after school, and I was like, why am I doing this? Like,
I had the same thing.
I was like, what the fuck is the point of this? Like, even if, and I remember thinking, like, what if I became the world's greatest, figurative drawer? And I'm like, is that what I want? And the answer is like, no. I mean, I think I've since realized that, like, it's just fun, and that was enough of a reason for me to do it. But it was like, I had this sort of
identity. Right?
Yeah, it was like this focus on it where I was like, what's the point? Like, who cares? Like, that's not why I'm doing it. I should be doing it because I love it, and because it makes me feel good, and because I enjoy it, and I get something out of it. Yeah. Not because I feel this need to be like, I finally figured it out, and I can draw anatomy correctly. Like, I sort of, I think I spent a lot of my 30s really kind of almost rejecting a lot of that stuff. And sort of not just resisting it, but being like, that doesn't matter, which I'm sorry to say that to art school students right now, but it does, but it doesn't in the way that you think.
I think it's incredibly complicated. I mean, I ask people that I see as, like, great artists. Like, Eric Gist at the Watts Atelier, who, like, I think he's one of the, like, he spent the past, like, 30 years just doing the figure drawing thing. And he's an illustrator.
So you're talking about, like, a classical
academic.
This is what I'm saying. Like, these are, even the term artist now is, like, such a...
It's very nebulous.
Somebody makes a fucking, latte with like a cool pattern on it, and people are like, "That's art!" Like,
right.
It's such a weird time to be alive. Where everyone, there's a difference between finding artistry and doing things and being an actual artist.
Craftsmanship. And stuff,
so I think that sort of gets used. I feel like that's not honed in enough on the day to day to people that sort of maybe could create some confusion. But
the actual definition of what art. Well, and he was saying, like, the number one piece of art advice he can give anybody is, like, it's not like how to draw arms better or like core shout or anything. It's don't tie any portion of your identity to your art.
That's funny. Okay,
Same exact
same thing. Yeah,
and
it's true.
And I see him as a master academic artist. And I don't know. It's like I realized something about that lifestyle of pursuing that academic side is more of like it's kind of like a monkish lifestyle or like a like a karate school or something,
That'd be fun. Karate and drawing. I think that's true. I think, and again, but like I say this now, but like I enjoyed it at the time, and I still enjoy it. Like, but I don't know. Like, this is a broader conversation too about like academia in general, and like what is college, and like what are you doing in those years in college, and is that really what you have to do? And there's this. I mean, for me anyway, there's also this, I have this thing in the back of my head where I'm like, oh, I drew this incorrectly, I'm going to get an F. Like, you did it wrong. Like, if draftsmanship and drawing exactly what you see in front of you and trying to master a form and understand that, if that's what your goal is, then sure. Yeah. I think more people than not, that's probably not what they're trying to do, but they get caught up in the minutia of that. Yeah. And they kind of maybe forget why they're doing it in the first place. Yeah. And I think in my case, like, I came back to, when I was in live action, I should say when, I'm still sort of in it a little bit. I'm like 1 foot in, 1 foot out. But that period of time where I was like, I was working production, I was working as a producer, I was working, I was like doing a lot of different things. I was just on set for like 14 hours a day, like, all the time. So like, I wasn't really drawing all that much for a period of time. I was still always drawing, don't get me wrong, but it wasn't like my thing in the same sense. I think when I was doing that, I sort of forgot why I liked to draw in the first place.
Yeah, yeah.
And then I remember coming back to it and just being like, oh, that's why. It wasn't because of this thing that I learned in school and trying to do it correctly. I had sort of, I don't know, like Men in Black, like wiped my brain and like forgotten all the academic lessons I learned and remembered that it was just about sort of this weirdo self-expression kind of story thing that I have where I was like, well, I like to write weird characters and have dumb stories and draw weird drawings. And that part, you know, coming back to like these books, it was like allowing yourself to kind of do that and not feel goofy for it, you know?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Well, and I feel like I'm realizing as I'm getting older, there's like a macro level to art where there's the actual, like, you know, there's the initial image itself that stands on its own, and then there's the actual like subtext of it.
Sure.
You know?
Yeah.
It's like I have heard people critique like John Singer Sargent recently because he was this great academic fine artist, but then he was painting the aristocracy of England. And,
Sure.
You know, and like.
He's working on the Marvel movies of his day. That's
yeah,
all
yeah,
it was.
exactly. Well, and it's like great artist, but it's like most people actually would rather just like just draw for fun. You know, it doesn't. They don't have to be painting the most famous people to have their artwork be valued. You know.
Yeah, it's a matter of like, what do you want out of it? Really is.
Yeah,
and that's hard. That's not an easy. It seems like it's an easy question to answer.
Right.
It's actually incredibly difficult.
It's the most difficult.
It's the
question.
fucking hardest thing you'll ever have to answer.
Well, the problem is, I think, is it changes.
And that's okay too.
Well, the fact that I think I'm multiple people in
Yeah.
a sense where like from one perspective I'm the guy that'll sit around and eat Ben and Jerry's and play video games.
Yeah.
But also like I did a bike ride from San Diego to San Luis Obispo last year. It took like a week.
That was awesome. Yeah.
And it's like I'm both people and
Sure.
like trying to integrate both of those versions of myself together. You know, they often conflict with each other. You
Sure.
know? And I think it's the same thing with art and creativity.
Yeah, I mean, I think you might realize as you get older is like you are both of those people. It's not it's not two separate people. It's
Right.
that's one person, or one informs the other. Like you bike ride for a week from San Diego to SLO, and then you need fucking 3 days of decompressing and playing a video game. You know.
Yeah, yeah.
And the expectation of yourself to sort of always be on and always be producing and always be, you know, whatever, manifesting, whatever you want to call it, is also like you're gonna reach a point where you're tired because you're a human being who's a person, and you know, ebbs and flows, that kind of shit. Like
Yeah. Well, and I think often, again, the art education sphere does not preach balance, you know?
But that's not what they're intended to do, you know what I mean? I feel like that's not the point of school. That's not the point of art school specifically. It's like they're there to try and... I mean, I don't know. I've never been an art educator, so I don't know, but it's a really hard thing to try. Like, how do you take drawing and like turn it into a class? It's very weird. Like, you can really only kind of codify, like, for example... anatomy, right? You're like, because art's so subjective. Art's so like, well, whatever the fuck you want it to be. But how do you get in a class where you're like, how am I going to grade you? It's okay. Well, can you draw this arm correctly? And then that's it. But then, understandably, that becomes the sort of status quo of like what you think education is. But education, it's harder to quantify. It's harder to turn it into something about like, well, what makes you happy emotionally when you're doing it? You know what I mean? Like that's not really a thing you can put a grade on.
Yeah.
And yet, because that's not something you can put a grade on, it's not necessarily taught in school, again, for understandable reasons, and you can't really or it's not seen as something as important. So I guess that ends up becoming more of a conversation that people need to have amongst themselves outside of school, or maybe like mentors or whatever, or people within the school who are trying to round out your education and teach you about other stuff. But yeah, I think the validity that the validation that like school will give to certain aspects of the creative process is kind of this weird, unintentional, you know, it backfires in some way because of that.
Yeah, and I think it's ultimately like it's a very small part of somebody's entire career, and I think afterwards is actually when like the real education starts generally for a lot of people. Like what do I do with this newfound
what do I do with these skills?
I can draw arms really well. So and now what, you know? And,
I mean that's college in general too. I think most people or a lot of people, whatever you went to school for, aren't necessarily doing whatever they did in school every day. Although it does inform them. I mean, it also depends on like what do you think the point of college is? What do you think the point of school is? What do you think the point of you know, you can go down all these rabbit holes. Like plenty.
I think it's an incredibly complicated conversation, but
it's complicated. But I think the most important thing is to figure out like what do you want out of it.
Yeah.
And that's a lesson that applies to everything. You know, when you start working professionally, even you'll get maybe hired to do some shit that you're like, this is terrible, I can't do this, or like,
Yeah.
I have no interest in this. And like, your job is really not about how well you can draw something or write something or produce something. Your job is to figure out how do you make that something that you give a shit about and you're interested in.
Right.
That's actually the job.
Yeah.
That's more than anything, that's what the job is.
Yeah.
There's no, objective way that something turns out great. It's just a matter of like, if you can figure out a way that you're interested in it and then you put your stamp on it and that's it.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and maybe sometimes failure could be defined as just that lack of interest,
Yeah, yeah.
I think that's a lot of the time in creative fields, that's what it is.
Mm-hmm.
When I failed at creative things, it's because I just didn't like that particular thing that I was doing. And I just didn't want to get up in the morning and do it. And,
Yeah. Or I feel like some of my failures had to do with trying to do something in a way that I thought I was supposed to do.
Yeah.
Or I was trying to express a voice that I thought I should be expressing rather than understanding what my own voice was.
Yeah.
And then going with that.
Right.
And that's been a process that has thankfully gotten better as I've gotten older. I'm happy to report. So.
Right. Yeah. Well, I found that I'm probably like a horrible employee. I'm like a horrible person to hire because I have no attention to detail and
really,
and it's like it's okay. Like I found there's a spot for everybody.
Sure.
In
yeah.
spite of it's not like, for anyone listening to this, if you feel like you have some fatal flaw of who you are, it's not like you're completely unemployable or don't have any spot in, I guess, the world of entertainment or art or anything. But,
yeah, I mean, I think it's a lot of trial and error.
Yeah.
And figuring out like I said, like production. Like, if you had told me like at 21 when I was like finishing school that someday you will be like managing and running film sets, I'd be like, what the fuck are you talking about? Like, I don't have that skill. Yeah. But it was just these series of weird things that happened in my life. Not weird in a bad way, but just like one thing kind of led to another. And then I'm like, well, I guess now I'm in LA, like as a PA. And then I was like, well, I guess you see something and you're like, oh, well, I like what the first AD's doing. And then and that's like,
one thing leads to another.
And then I'm like, well, I guess that's a job that I'm doing now. And that's weird. And that was insane. And it was like really strange. And I never would have thought I had the capacity to do that. But life finds a way, like a Jurassic Park, right? Yeah,
well, and I feel like, I never would have guessed, I choose to live in a van, or, like, I have pretty bad social anxiety, and the fact that I'm having a podcast with, like, I don't really know you. It's like there's like an element of, like, wow, this is such a strange thing to have happened,
That you and I are talking in this van, or?
Well, I guess the macro level of it, it's like us meeting at Wondercon, preceded by
right.
all these
chance,
other
like
things.
it's been very chance. I see. Yeah.
It's like it's very unlikely.
Odd. Yeah. But you kind of have to like say, okay, that's nice.
Yeah.
If you're enjoying, hopefully it's not a terrible
absolutely.
conversation.
Yeah, really enjoying.
You're just like, what led to
right.
you sitting here having to talk to me? No, I understand what you're saying, but those ultimately become the things that you look forward to and that you enjoy, and that sort of lead you in a way that's interesting. So, are you enjoying doing the podcast? It seems like
absolutely.
But no, I don't mean like this one with me specifically.
Overall,
I just mean in general. Yeah.
Well, it's been an interesting challenge because, I think with any of your own endeavors, and I'm sure you could relate, is like it's always easier to just do nothing or do what you've always done. I
don't know about not to do anything for me personally, but I have like crippling anxiety where if I don't do something. Like in the pandemic, I got up every day at 7 a.m. Yeah. And Sarah was like, "Are you insane? Like, what do you do?" And I was like, "I can't not do anything." Like, it made me more upset and stressed out. Yeah. To just blob. Yeah. I mean, which is not saying I never did anything blobby, right? Yeah. Like, I played some games. Like, I hung out. Like, I definitely had stretches where emotionally you're trying to cope with all the stuff that's happening. But in terms of, to me, it was like I'd rather do something poorly than to not do anything at all because it made me feel worse to not do it. So. I'm sorry, interrupted, but
no, totally fine. Well, and I feel like, whether like being a blob is in a sense easier because you could just stay in bed or you can get up,
Sure.
And I guess like for a podcast like this, the only thing that happens is if like both people agree to do it and that it's worth their time, in a sense, and like. Sure.
Although your job also becomes to draw it out of them too.
Yeah.
That's what I'm saying. You're gonna come across people who are not really gonna engage, and you got to figure out a way to engage them. That's your job as the host in general. I mean, because I've been doing a podcast now for like 3 years. Yeah. So I've met some people that like aren't they're not feeling it. Yeah. And your job just becomes like, okay, well, if that person's not into it, how do I get them into it? Because you're recording something, and you gotta always be thinking about the audience, kind of thing.
Yeah. Well, and I have recorded some where I felt that they haven't gone exactly the way I wanted to. Yeah. But they were still worth me doing. Sure. Like me editing it and me trying to put them together was a little bit difficult. But when I released it, people cared about it. Yeah. Some people watched it and like, great. I really enjoyed it. Yeah. And I think that like that, you know, initial tedium of doing it and the actual fear of it just not being interesting.
Yeah.
Those are the reasons to not do it, you know, or to not keep doing it.
Yeah.
You know, and I think whenever you record a podcast or put out a book, there's a risk that it's going to cause more negative emotion than positive emotion
within myself or within others.
I think both. You know? I think when somebody doesn't like a thing I do, it causes a tremendous amount of negative emotion.
Really?
Yeah.
That's just practice, I guess. You
Yeah.
have to kind of just get more. I guess as long as you, again, this is the therapy angle of it, right? It's just like, if you know you did a good job, as best as you could, I should say. Good job is very subjective, but again, it's really about making peace with your own limitations, making peace with the fact that like you're not as smart as you think you are, you're not as talented as you think you are, you're not as charming as you think you are. I don't mean that in like a bad way, but just being like, it's okay.
Yeah.
You know, these are my stats, right? And just being like, within these stats, I'm gonna have to just let it go, because otherwise, and I think this is what happens sometimes on some projects is like that I've experienced, and I'm sure plenty of other people have, is like you just get into this insane revision mode of like it's not so much that the drawing isn't as good, is that like you're not as, or you don't draw that way in the way that you think you do, you know, and you're trying to make it look like something else, but I guess your voice is the best way to think about it, where it's like I have a low register voice, but if I'm like trying to talk like this all the time, you know, that's not natural, and then I'm trying to force myself to talk in a certain way. It's like, it seems as futile as that. Yeah. So you kind of just have to let yourself be. Right. And if it's good, if other people like it, then they'll like it, and if they don't, that's okay. It's the same thing as you. It's like, as a reflection of who you are, you know?
Well, and I've heard Marshall talk about this, or I've heard a lot of people talk about this, but your art identity and your style is, in a sense, the collection of all your flaws, you know, and all your mistakes.
It's like a very Marshall thing to say. I love it.
Like everything that you're not is everything that you're doing, you know?
Yeah, or everything that you've experienced ends up informing it in some way, you know?
Yeah. Sorry, just making sure it's on the right pattern. But, and I don't know, it always, you know, it always comes back to the simplicity of just, like, loving yourself, loving what you do, and being okay with the failure side of it.
Yeah, not in like an arrogant way, but I'd say accepting yourself.
Yeah.
Before you love yourself, because I know a lot of people who love themselves without accepting
the
shitty parts of themselves, and then being okay with their deficiencies, or at least trying to work on their deficiencies and being honest about it. Just being humble. Being humble is a simpler way of putting it.
Well, and again, another cliche I think of being a creative person is like how much you could deal with failure versus success. And like when you look at something like Star Wars, or like any of the great like pieces of fiction in the past like 20 years, you know, like Star Wars was meant to be a Flash Gordon remake, I think, and it wasn't. It's Star Wars, and it, like, if George Lucas was like, I'm not going to do this unless I get the Flash Gordon license, then Star Wars never would have been made.
Sure. Yeah.
And then I remember looking at the original concept art for like Darth Vader and all the Jedi before, and it's not good concept art. I mean, it's
McQuarrie? I think's his name, right?
Well,
Ralph McQuarrie.
I think it was like sketches that George Lucas did himself or something, and they're not well drawn, but they're indicative of what the designs ended up looking like. That's all matters. Well, and you know, he was able to be like his ideas were benefited by other people who were good at that particular thing. Yeah. Because George Lucas could secure everything else and get everything else going, that enabled Star Wars to exist, you know. But if he was caught up on his concept art not being as good as someone else, then
the ego of it to an extent,
then it might have never have gotten created, you know.
Yeah, that's true. That's more of a lesson of leadership, I guess. It's like when you're sort of rallying other creative people. I've heard this so many times, where it's just like, hire good people and get the fuck out of their way. Yeah. You know, it's not about you. It's about the idea, and it's about you know, why are you hiring somebody? Right. If you don't think that what they're doing is good, then just don't hire them. Just do it yourself. But if you are hiring them, let them do the thing that they're good at. Yeah. It's a weird thing that no one seems to. Everybody sort of understands it, but it doesn't really go into practice that much, unfortunately. Yeah, well, I think it's difficult. I think people want to take ownership over stuff, and people want to be seen as a creative person. And, I think it's insecurity, yeah. It's more just like, if that person succeeds, then what am I? You know, there's no confidence in what you've brought to it, and not being clear about what it is that you're good at. And, you know, you fucking wrote Star Wars. Like, it's fine. You know what I mean? Like,
it's okay to be bad.
It's okay that somebody else drew Darth Vader's helmet better than you, and I think George Lucas probably in that sense understood that. Like, So that's part of the. I'm sorry, I keep going back to the same thing. It's like that's part of the acceptance of yourself and understanding who you are and making peace with who you are and being humble about it. And and cheering on other people who are like, oh, that's so awesome. Like you're so good at this thing. Can I have you do this? And then just being excited when they do that. And,
yeah.
You know, that kind of thing.
Right. And I feel like the more you can lean into that, like the potentials of resentment or, you know, loss of credit or any of that kind of stuff just go away. And there's that other anecdotal side of it. It's like the top 3 things you need to be hired, which is a very Marshall thing to talk about. It's like you need to be good, fast, or easy to work with. And if you have 2 of those things, you're good. But if you have all 3, you're great.
You're great, yeah. My thing has always been I'm very reliable. Yeah. That's generally been the thing that has gotten me hired. Yeah. It's not because I'm good, but I'm always like, almost always like on time. I'm sorry, I was a couple minutes late.
It's okay.
I was working this morning and I got caught. Got caught up in a store.
Appreciate you taking
no. I was like, I think I was like 3 minutes late, and I was just like, oh no, I've like, you know, that's the kind of on time I usually am. Is that if I'm like 3 minutes is unacceptable, I should be there at least like 5 minutes early. But it's generally like I've made a reputation for being somebody who's generally punctual. Yeah. And I try to be easy to work with and sort of be agreeable and try to not add drama and be over the top and make it about myself. But maybe too much to an extent. Or I could have probably afforded to taken a little bit more for myself.
Yeah, but more credibility.
More credibility or more, you know, my personality, even though it's big, tends to be somewhat deferential. It doesn't. I don't really like to make stuff about myself so much. Also, it's weird to sit here and even talk to you about like myself. I'm like, I don't know. It's weird, but
I feel like I tend to be on the same way of I tend to be more negative towards myself than positive, and I feel like generally, you know, I've had ideas that have done well for other people, and for some reason, it's still easy to doubt myself and doubt the validity of what I do. You know?
Well, then it becomes your job. That's why it's your responsibility. That's what makes it harder. It's like if it wasn't your responsibility to put it into play,
and the risk, and
then the risk, and then the failure. Like if somebody else fucks it up, you're like, well, that person didn't. I would have.
Yeah, I would have done it better.
I would have done it. Like I'm such a genius, and then when you're in that position, you're like, oh shit. Yeah. I remember that happened a lot. Not a lot, but I remember that happening when I was. The first few times I directed anything, I was just like, oh, this is not as easy. This is a very different job than people think, and, or than I thought at the time. Yeah. And how much of it is just communicating with people and managing people and sort of getting them on board with something. It's stuff that because again, I would read interviews or you watch interviews with people on like YouTube or TV shows or something, or. Yeah. And it's just like people going and talking about this flowery language about the importance of cinema, and then now you're trying to do this. And it's a lot of just kind of day-to-day shit of like, you know, dude came in today and, you know, he's in a bad mood and you got to try and get him on board. You know, it's very like practical. For the team like it's some shit like that. Like it's very practical. It's just people skills. Like that kind of stuff.
I guess, again, the older I get and the more I'm around bigger projects, the more I'm like, how does anything get fucking made?
Unbelievable,
it's a miracle.
Right? Every movie is a miracle.
Yeah. Well, the fact that, like this park, exists, it's like, this must have been incredibly stressful for a few people.
Oh, yeah.
It's like zoning it. And
yeah.
You know, people are always probably trying to tear it down and put, like, condominiums here and stuff.
Or someone complaining that there's a park and now they have to hear kids screaming or something.
Yeah,
There's always some point of conflict with everything.
Well, and it's here too. And probably the sheer amount of money for the single park as well, like millions of dollars.
Park. Yeah.
You know, and I don't know. I'm just going about my life. My standards for what is successful and what's not has changed drastically. Like the thing
that's good.
Like, you know, a B movie on sci-fi TV getting made is a miracle, and it's actually incredibly impressive. And there are probably tons of really talented people on that. You know.
Oh yeah, I've been on plenty of films where, and this is the thing I thought was funny that as I've worked in LA for so many years, is like a lot of the stuff you work on is crap, but it doesn't mean that the people who work on it are terrible. It's just sort of like, for whatever reason, this is the script that got greenlit, this is the show that we're on, this is what we're doing, and you find people who are really talented, or we work on these great sets where like everyone gets along and it's so much fun, and the movie's terrible. Yeah, right. You know, it has nothing to do with how talented those people were or how hard they tried. It was just like, I don't know.
Yeah. Well, and the other side of that is, you know, money and scale does not necessarily mean it's going to be a great movie, which is crazy to me. It's like, you know, there are movies made every year that have $100 million budget that end up being not good movies.
Yep. I
think that's a really inspiring thing for an individual, actually. Because,
you think so?
Well, it's like you don't need an incredible amount of money to
Yeah.
do something. You need a good idea, and good execution.
Good execution, I think, is more of what that is, more than, even... And again, that's like the terrible thing about LA is like there's so many people who have great ideas. Like, I bet you half the people that worked on these, more than half, like 3/4 of the people who worked on these $100 million movies that are terrible, are all really talented and probably have really good ideas. And they don't fucking listen to them. Like that's because that's not how the market is. That's not how like the studio says that. You know what I mean? Like, they're all there. They're all there all the time. Like I can think of a few people off the top of my head who I'm just like, they got great ideas and nothing happens with it because people just don't listen to it. Like, so being more receptive is a pretty important thing to do and is an important thing to have, like just listening to people's ideas and talking to them and chatting to them and realizing like it can kind of come from anywhere. But a lot of Hollywood and LA is just like, well, did this person already have success? Okay, then we'll just keep listening to that person forever and then not necessarily
off the sequel brand of Hollywood.
Yeah, or just like, well, this person, you're incentivized to sort of like keep listening to the same 5 people over and over again, and it's harder and harder. I mean, some of them are good though. Some of the $100 million movies are not bad.
Well, sorry, I have to check this camera.
No, I understand.
It resets.
Yeah.
But I feel
the
like
60s, the SD cards end up crapping out after a certain point. I remember.
Yeah. I got this one though, which is a nicer camera.
The Lumix was good. I shot a feature on that.
I have to get another one.
Which one is this?
G85.
Oh damn, nice. Yeah.
But yeah, I think it's part of the reason why I'm so into YouTube. The idea of YouTube is so romantic to me. Of like, anyone can just use their cell phone and put something online, and it can do well. It's not like everyone's going to be able to make something creative, but you can come up with an idea in the morning and execute it by the end of the day and upload it without any oversight or any, like you can just do it. You know? And this podcast for me has been an interesting, just like, so my dad works in comics and he's worked in comics my entire life.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah. He worked at Wildstorm back in the day.
Oh shit. Okay.
And
right.
worked. He was publisher at Marvel recently and stuff.
That's so cool.
And I've been around like corporate entertainment for a huge portion of my life. And I always like, just talking to him about how things get made, how toys get made, how books get published. Like, there's so many gatekeepers to everything.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. And just seeing him navigate that world, I was so like...
It's exhausting.
Well, it made me really cynical about the idea of being creative for a long time.
You think so? Yeah.
Because, getting into Barnes & Noble or Toys R Us is extremely hard.
Yeah.
Whereas, like, again, the way things are moving now is, like, everyone is moving online. Everyone's consuming stuff online.
Yeah.
And, I guess it's made the entire playing field, everything, like, a lot more equal than it was before,
Yeah. That's like every creative industry, music, art, movies, all that stuff, publishing. Yeah. But I don't know. Somebody's talking about mashed potatoes over there. This is the fun part of recording in a park.
Well, I have a sign. I didn't put it up this time, but I have a sign that says, "Hi, we're recording a podcast.
Yeah.
Come play say.
Come say hi."
Yeah.
I'm like, probably not the best thing in LA. But what was I saying? I forgot. All now I can think about is mashed potatoes. Like I was yelling about
oversight or something, or
So are you?
Gatekeepers?
But so are you thinking more of like putting stuff on YouTube now? Or,
Yeah.
But you said you were.
So.
What are you trying to like? You're trying to do shorts. You're trying to do like a book. I know you have ambitions to do all of it, but like, what's the thing that sort of is like? Here's another question I always ask myself. Right, is like, I remember when I was doing these books. Right, the first time I did it, and this has happened a couple of times where I'm like, if I don't do this, like I'm gonna die. Like I remember feeling like I'm gonna die if I don't do, or if I like died tomorrow, this would be a huge regret that I didn't do this thing, or I didn't tell this story, or I didn't do this drawing, whatever it is. And like that's a real thing that like would really bother me. In a lot of ways, like anxiety is what pushed me to do some of these things of just like fear of not being able to get it out, or like dying in a plane crash before I could actually like complete this script, or whatever it is.
Right.
So do you have one of those that's, you don't have to pitch it right now. I just mean like, do you have something like that specifically?
Well, I want to keep doing the podcast. I want to see if I can grow this to be something somewhat cool.
Okay. Yeah.
And then I'd like to do my own educational content, whether it's around drawing or just, some like mix of philosophy and drawing.
Okay.
Mix of fun philosophy drawing stuff.
Yeah.
I'd also like to write a book at some point. Not necessarily like something that I print, but something that's more of like an audiobook that people download and listen, like not on Audible sort of thing.
Sort of just about life,
Yeah,
your
yeah.
experiences, your travels.
Like one of the chapters would be like, and it sounds kind of corny, but it's like why do we build why do we build museums instead of more hospitals? Where it's like,
Okay,
you know,
it's an interesting question.
well, but like something like the Met, Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York City, is incredibly expensive. You know, it's in the this giant building in the middle of the most valuable land, arguably in the world, housing some of the most valuable paintings on the planet, and theoretically, if we wanted to, as a society, we could sell those paintings and save people's lives, right?
Sure.
And instead of doing that,
assuming the money went to the right place.
Well, assuming
actually,
that, like in a perfect world, but like if we could theoretically argue that these are just oil paintings sitting in a room versus something a little bit more meaningful, to the point where it's like we should sell these and save human lives. But and again, I think as a society, we've put resources into keeping these places open and beautiful, and there's like a deeper reason to that than them just being.
Do you think healthy people with no museums is a life worth living?
Yeah. Well, and it's like I don't know. It's like but it's like, this grand thing has become this, like from one perspective, a symbol of just crazy excess, and from another symbol like a bastion for human potential or something.
Yeah, I think it's pretty important. But
and the book would be about that kind of stuff. Like why do we place, art above human lives a lot of the time?
I would argue that we don't, but.
Well, I guess
I would argue that we don't place a lot of value on human lives.
Yeah. I agree. Yeah. Well, and
respectfully.
Yeah. I would agree as well.
Yeah.
Something like a Marvel movie, like the Avengers.
Sure.
Cost however much money. However 10,000 people or so worked on it.
So many people. Yeah.
And the amount of effort that took, again, some creative, like some problem that could help a lot of people could have been solved. And
sure.
And I want to try
theoretically again. That's theoretically, yeah.
Being very optimistic.
I think that's assuming that money, like you said, money doesn't necessarily mean a better product. It just means a fuck ton of money going towards something. It's a movie. It could be just as bad as, how much money do you spend trying to rebuild, Iraq after the collapse in 2003? It's like billions and billions and trillions. It's nothing. Oh, great, we made ISIS. Awesome. That was a really good use of money. Like
well.
It's kind of like
it's super
you can go either way. Yeah, you can go either way with it.
Well, but I want to make an argument that something like the Met is actually valuable in some way.
Sure. Yeah. Sounds like a podcast, by the way, in terms of what you're talking about, rather than a book necessarily, because you wanted to do audio. You could probably split this up into chapters. And that's my pitch to you, by the way.
Yeah. Yeah. It would be labeled as like an audiobook, but it'd essentially be.
You just do a podcast series about it. I think you're already like sort of in that groove, and clearly you got the space for it. So
yeah.
You just sit and produce it.
Yeah. Well, I guess I want to. I don't know if it's immoral to monetize something like that.
Why not? Cares? You got to pay for the van, right?
Yeah. That's true.
I think if you were like a Getty and you had all this money, then like sure, give it out for free. But you're literally living in a van, dude. I think it's okay. I think people are willing to give you some gas money so that you don't die.
Yeah.
And like freeze to death.
It gets pretty cold at night.
Yeah, especially now.
Yeah.
Yeah. Is that a thing you worry about a lot? Is like the monetization of certain things? I don't think you're like profiting off of someone's suffering or anything. But
no, I think about the idea of monetization in general as this weird moral quandary of like you went to USC, right? And it's like a college like USC is incredibly expensive. And is it like, was it worth it to the students of USC to pay that amount of money to go there? And some will say yes. And
I haven't paid it yet.
Well, and it's like
still waiting on the student loans to get pushed out.
Oh man, yeah. Well, and like from like you might say it's worth it from one perspective and not worth it from another perspective. And
yeah, I mean, if I were to make that much money off of my degree, then it would have been worth it. But I have yet to see that kind of return. So I don't know. It's can you put a value on experiences and connections and relationships that you make? And it's debatable. I mean, my specific example, then I'd be like, I don't know. Yeah, I didn't want to spend that much money, but again, I didn't want to take out that much of a loan. Yeah. But I felt like at that time that was it's the #1 ranked school in the fucking world for film. So I was like, well, I'd be stupid to not take this opportunity to be at the most prestigious university to study something that I really care about. So, and my family is very, they're immigrants. So they're like, getting a degree is always like, great, just get another degree. So there was a lot of value in it for me in terms of that. I don't. I mean, I probably could have just been like, "Oh, I'll go take out like $200,000 loan from the bank if anyone had ever given it to me, and try to make a movie."
Yeah.
Actually, there was a conversation I had with Marshall before I went in. I remember he was just like, "You can always just take out a bunch of money and just make a movie."
Yeah.
And at least you'd have like a movie by the end of it. So that was like a discussion I had with him that I had to try and navigate. But I sort of valued education, and now I don't value it anymore. No, I'm kidding. I don't know. We'll see. Well, that's not really a question I have an answer for yet.
Yeah.
I'm hoping that I'll have a clearer answer for it. But if on my deathbed I never made, enough money to pay it off, then I'll be like, nope, wasn't worth it.
Well, and I feel like going back to the idea of monetization, it's like monetizing something like school in that way. I think it's a really complicated thing, and people sell books and people buy books they don't read. People get gym memberships they don't use.
Yeah.
Like, just being around the art education sphere online, like most people who buy a Gumroad or some tutorial, 95% of people don't finish it.
Really?
And it's like, well, what about the 5% of people that do, or the 95% of people that like they didn't finish it, but they got some really important piece of knowledge out of it, And I think it's like really easy to look at, from what I've talked to from a lot of people that, I think should monetize. There is that sense of like I'm not good enough, or like this is
how much
fundamentally
dog shit is out there.
Yeah.
People pay money for it. I'm just like, ugh, terrible stuff.
Yeah.
Just stuff that I'm like, how does this person have like 5 million followers and they're making like hundreds of thousands of dollars? And I'm like, it's crap.
Yeah.
Like you said, you watch like $100 million movie and you're just like, oh, well, that's inspiring.
Yeah, crazy.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know. Money's weird, man. Who knows? Money's complicated.
Yeah.
But you got to figure, well, I got to eat. I got to pay rent. Well, I got to make sure that I have a living, and you'll price something based on what the market seems like it'll pay for it.
Yeah.
And if you can deliver a product that you feel looks, like it's as worthy of something else then fucking why not?
Yeah.
What do you have to lose by doing it? You know what I mean?
Nothing.
Nothing,
Yeah,
really.
right.
Like, with the exception of if you have to, like, printing costs and, like, time and stuff.
Yeah.
And I'm like,
Well,
you're not doing it, somebody else will.
Theoretically, less time playing video games and more
Yeah, right.
eating Ben and Jerry's, Yeah. Which is the point of life, right?
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah.
That's what you're trying to get to. You're like, I'm trying to make a lot of money so I can retire and play video games and eat Ben and Jerry's.
Yeah,
Guilt-free.
Yeah, 100%. Well, a question that I like to ask everybody is, would you be doing exactly the same thing you're doing right now if you had $1 billion? And the point of it is not to, like, dream about what, like, crazy project you do. It's like, you still might be working on your comic book if you had $1 billion,
Or making, like, a film or something like that. Yeah, I'd be doing creative stuff, and I'd probably be doing a substantial amount more traveling, I would say.
Right.
But like on a day-to-day, probably.
Yeah.
I'd probably just be like, well, what weird fucking idea am I going to try and execute now? And, you just have more resources, and you'd have more, agency to, like, hire people to do stuff because you could pay them.
Right.
But, it's not like I'd be like, oh, I'm going to quit
Right.
working as a comic book artist and finally become that accountant that I've always wanted to be.
Yeah. Well, sometimes a lot of people, like a lot of the answers that people give me, it's like, oh, I would put that money into real estate, and then I'd go buy a bunch of property, and then I'd
like
get
Office
into
Space.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And it's like, dude, $1 billion is a lot of fucking
It's a lot of money. Yeah.
Yeah.
Or you could affect positive change in a lot of people's lives. I mean, I guess I'm answering it in that selfish way of just like, what would I do? But I'm like, you could just, give $1 billion to bunch of charities.
You could save a life.
You could say, like you said, like you could, instead of the Met having like another painting, you could just be like, you could save many lives, I think, with $1 billion.
Yeah, right.
The problem is like what's sustainable, I think, is what the problem that people always get into when it comes to that much money.
Yeah.
They're like, how do you make this $1 billion last, like, 10 lifetimes rather than just like give everybody like a $100 check one time?
Yeah, right. Yeah. And I guess the legacy side of it. And I asked a friend this the other day, and she was like, I don't think billionaires should exist. Just like the ethical implication of it.
It is really fucking crazy, right? It's nuts. It's crazy that we are... sorry, I get distracted very easily.
I do too. It's okay. Yeah. Well, the fact that people do have billions of dollars lying around it's so weird. Like, people around here too, not like for like a mile away or less.
Yeah.
There's some guy with like an absurd amount of money just walking around,
just chilling, like, I don't know. I think the strange part is to be a billionaire and wanting so desperately to be liked. Like,
Right.
That's the strange part to me.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and I guess it's really indicative of the cliche that rich people say that money's not going to solve all your problems. You know, it's like money might actually cause problems for a lot of people. Of like, you know.
Yeah, it depends on how you got rich. I think probably.
Yeah. Right. Well, and like people like if you got rich off selling Uzis to
weapons
horrible
manufacturing,
people like that actually you might not want that $1 billion.
Probably don't want the money. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and it's part of the reason why I realized I'll probably never be a billionaire.
Yeah, I was gonna say we're in the arts. I don't think we'll ever be billionaires. So that's not something that we have to worry about.
Unless we're like George Lucas or something.
That's true. Spielberg and Lucas, I think.
Yeah.
Were those the only 2 billionaires?
Oprah.
In terms of like movie makers, I guess Oprah.
Sure
Yeah.
There has to be, right? Like.
Is Cameron a billionaire? I'm not sure.
He has to be, right?
I'm not sure.
I don't. He's either.
He sinks so much of his own money into all these projects that I think he I don't know. Who knows?
Are you gonna watch Avatar?
Oh yeah, I'm excited about the next one.
Yeah.
I don't know. It was like fine. I don't care. I like James Cameron. I'm like I kind of just like that. There's this. God, my friend had the best description of James Cameron. He said he's a deep sea diver who makes Hollywood blockbusters in his spare time, which I think is like the funniest way of thinking about James Cameron. Like he's so insane. Like he's so insane that that guy is like truly like a rare thing. Like there's nobody in the world that's like that. Like
that drive and that insane passion.
He's great. Like I had a friend that was a PA on Avatar, and he was just like, bro, he's like, you just see this motherfucker go around and like talk to the editors and be like, not saying this, but he's like, he clearly knows how to edit better than this person, and he clearly knows like more than this DP, and he clearly knows more than this. And he's just working with them, and I'm like, that guy's probably like some weird level of genius that. Right. And his movies are palatable, you know. They're fucking Terminator's awesome. You're gonna tell me Terminator's not great?
I've actually never seen Terminator.
Oh my god, I've never seen Terminator 2 though.
I've never seen Terminator 2.
Oh my god,
I've never seen Alien. I've never seen Jurassic Park.
Well, Jurassic Park, Spielberg, but
well, still, but I could go.
Right. Oh, just in terms of movies you haven't seen. Yeah, that's a. Those are good ones to watch, but.
Well, I guess Spielberg is another guy making Jaws at like 23 or something.
Yeah. Jaws. Although I mean, now we're getting into like hot takes, but I'm like, I don't know the last Spielberg movie that I was like truly obsessed with.
Yeah.
I can't remember the last. I'm just like, I don't know, whatever.
Yeah. Well, I guess I don't know. All this stuff is the crazy scale of all of this is like even if we're the most successful illustrators in our like we're suddenly the best technical and creative person in our sphere, there's always somebody that's like way better, you know, or like
success doesn't mean you're the best. It just means that like you got the most recognition and money for it. Like
and you know, in terms of drawing is such like it's not like nearly as important as it might seem being in like the small sphere of Comic-Con or something.
And the other thing I was going to say is in terms of because you said you have younger people, I think the other big trap. This is just my opinion. My opinion is like the big trap that you fall into as an artist is trying to impress other artists. Yeah. And 90% of the world is not another artist. Yeah. And so we fall into these traps of trying to be like, oh, well, this person will. You're trying to be very clever and like impress this person who understands draftsmanship or color theory or like whatever. And like most of your audience of whatever you make is hopefully going to be people who are not artists. Yeah. Not because you don't want artists to read it, but it's like just because that's what your broader crossover appeal will be. Yeah. And that's who you should be thinking about as much as you can. Like, but that's the weird part of being somebody that's a creative, I think. Yeah. Is that you're like, oh, like the people that read this will know that like my hand anatomy is not correct, and like no one gives a shit.
No one cares.
They're not paying attention to that. Like,
the consumers don't care at all.
Yeah.
Well, it's made me really curious about the ethics of AI art recently.
We're stepping in it. We're stepping in it.
Yeah. Well, it's really tough because like I look at the quality of it now, and it's like really good.
It's pretty crazy, yeah.
And I don't like consumers won't care. You know, like the Magic the Gathering.
I don't know. That's debatable, right? It does look scary to me. It's so like weird, and it's like I still fucking hate. What do they call it? Not mocap. The like Princess Leia, the fake one. I'm trying to remember what the term is. It's escaping me right now. I don't know why. But just when they have like fake CG actors, you know, and then they try. It's always Uncanny Valley to me. And I'm like,
have you seen Midjourney V4?
Which one?
Midjourney version 4. No. Could I show you?
What is it?
It's an AI.
Oh, it's the AI thing. Okay.
Yeah. Here. Well, okay. It's on my laptop. I've been messing around, and again, this is like I understand the ethical side of this, and I'm just looking at this purely as just like a curiosity sort of thing. So this is all AI.
This is aping someone else's style, though, ultimately, right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
For sure.
Well, that cat is funny.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, it looks crazy.
It does.
Yeah, it looks like other people's work.
Yeah. Well, I guess it's like, I don't think it's quite there in terms of...
Looks like a weird Line Decker ripoff
I had
almost.
a Line Decker Rockwell together.
That's crazy. Holy shit.
Yeah, right?
Oh my god.
I thought this was super cool.
Yeah, but ultimately it's aping somebody else's style. Like, it won't just come up with its own thing, right?
No, it won't. Well, so I was sitting around with my dad, and he has a project around Sergei Eisenstein that he wants to do.
Okay.
And so we were just combining like Sergei Eisenstein in this style.
Different styles.
Sergei Eisenstein as Elmo. And then I just did academic figure study. And it is ripping off other things, but like all of this work took like 20 minutes of just like throwing stuff into a prompt generator. And it's like, I'm sure if you looked hard enough, it'd be easy to find maybe the sources, but I think at some point it might be so good that it's indistinguishable from
The original artist that it's...
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think people are understandably worried about that.
And it's, again, it's like, some of the anatomy is weird, but you throw in a style and it does it pretty well. And, again, just I don't know, it's such a weird thing to think
Yeah,
about.
it's a weird place to be in terms of the ethics of it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. That's a big one. I know people are like, it's a very hot debate.
Yeah. Well, and I guess I think that companies that hire artists, they have to be talking about, like, what are we going to do when this becomes okay to use commercially,
I don't know, because ultimately I feel like you're probably going to have... That's assuming that, like, the company that hires the artist knows how the fuck to control it and use it. You know what I mean? They're not going to know. You're still going to... I feel like you're still going to have to fall back to a creative person to be like, well, I know who JC Line... Like, your job is not about... A lot of your job is, if you're working with clients, for example, is like trying to understand what the fuck your client wants.
Yeah.
And then delivering that to them. So
Right.
if a client had any idea what they wanted, they wouldn't be hiring you in the first place.
Yeah.
So I don't know. Who knows? I'm going to come back to this in like 2 years and be like, oh, I was a dipshit. I really didn't understand what the hell this was.
I am too, 100%. But
That's why I'm like, it's also so new. It's hard to talk about. It feels like people want to have like a crazy, like intense conversation that sort of takes one side or another on it. And I'm just like, I don't really understand what any of this is. I don't understand what half the shit is that's happening right now. That's generally speaking something that like you have to deal with all the time. Like, I'm just trying to like understand what the fucking NFT was until like 6 months ago, and now they're throwing AI at me. Like, you need to take a stance on this. And I was like,
I don't fucking know. I just want to sit around and draw my
I was just like, I don't know. I'm still doing... Yeah, I'm like, it doesn't... I don't know. It'll come for me eventually, I'm sure.
Yeah.
And then at that point, I'll probably have very, very strong thoughts about it. So I guess I'm just not important enough to really have a clear opinion about it one way or another.
Yeah.
It is crazy to just look at, though, and be like, oh, that's cool. It's a cool trick.
Super sick, yeah.
Yeah, it's a wild trick to just be able to look at. I don't know. It was fun when there was, what was it, Dolly, just sending stupid shit to my friends. That was like, but that wasn't like, I wasn't like, oh, this is art, you know. But
it's just like a funny...
Yeah, it was just like a dumb, like...
Shrek fighting.
Yeah, exactly. It was just like, this is a fun party trick, I'm sure. Yeah. I'm sure it'll eventually become something that's terrifying, but...
Well, I see something nowadays, like a new thing came out recently that's ChatGPT, and you could feed it any question.
ChatGPT?
Yeah.
That's the name of the AI generator?
It's not marketable, I don't think.
Okay.
But the idea of it is really cool. Like, you can tell it, like, hey, I have this idea for a website that does this thing, and it'll code the website for you. You say like, hey, like your literal question is like, hey, can you code this website for me?
Yeah.
Then the website codes it for you, tells you how it works, how to implement it.
Okay.
You could feed it a question from like class. So if you have a math problem, you just copy your math problem.
Oh, it'll just answer it for you.
And give an explanation. Or if you say, write an essay about Catcher in the Rye, it'll write.
All right, it'll generate an essay for you.
Well, and it'll like, you could be like, write an essay in about Catcher in the Rye from the perspective of a fifth grader, you know, and it'll simplify it for a fifth grader or a second grader or a college essay or any of that stuff. And it's like, does a pretty good job. It's solving all these problems really quickly, you know, and I think it's like going to be pretty soon to where you're going to be able to, like, you combine the AI and the text thing, and it's like create a short video or a short animation about.
Oh yeah, for sure.
A donkey walking down the street.
Although I'll say this, right, is that number one, I'm pretty sure, if I'm not mistaken, I might be mistaken, they're technically not AI. None of this shit is. This is all machine learning. It's looking at patterns that already existed, and that's all AI. That's true AI, like, thinks for itself.
Oh, yeah.
This doesn't actually think for it. None of these do.
Right.
So as long as there's enough shit for it to mine and pull into itself, and that's what it's pulling from, it can recreate that. So theoretically, there will be a point where it's just eating its own shit. Like, it's just recycling the same thing over and over and over again.
Yeah.
And it doesn't actually... It's kind of a weird thing where I'm like, okay, I can see how in the short term it seems like a threat, but until it can actually make its own thing and create its own ideas and create its own stories, or it has a fifth grader that can writes its own fifth grade essays. All it's doing is just pulling from 10 million essays that are available online from a perspective of a fifth grader about this, and then it's combining it with this, which is sort of what your brain does in some way, but it doesn't actually make it.
It's kind of a rudimentary version of that, Well,
right, that's what I'm saying. So ultimately, machine learning is different from AI, so it's not actually... As long as that pool will run out eventually. It sounds crazy to think, but like there will be a pool of limited resources, and I think people are always just going to be making up new shit and making new connections, and AI will not make that connection unless it's prompted to do it.
Yeah.
Do you know what I'm saying? Yeah. So in the broader sense, I'm not really worried about it.
Yeah.
I'm sure it will affect me. Again, I say this now, and I'm like, I'm sure it'll come back to bite me in the ass in some way.
Yeah.
I don't want to sound like arrogant, like I have any fucking idea where any of this is going, but... Just based on knowing them, like, enough about the mechanics of it is like it's just not going to do that. Short term, yes. Long term, until it starts to create its own connections, it's not a thing to worry about. Yeah. I think anyway.
Well, I agree with. Well, I guess the argument, not even argument, but the thing that I'm trying to pay attention to is like the jobs that it can automate, like something like in betweening for animation, or some sense
that it can or cannot
that it could potentially automate.
Yeah.
It's like potentially like fantasy illustration or animation stuff, or just pitching an idea to a studio, like using AI as a way to create ideas. Like that's all potentially free game.
That's probably already happening now at this point.
Yeah.
I know. I know people who are already like doing this. Like they're already grabbing images that fucking artists. By the way, I know artists who are sort of, I won't tell anyone because I know, like, again, it's hot tub. Yeah. Someone who's just like, it's faster for me to just do this than to sit and paint these things. Like, what do I give a shit? It's just part of this pitch that I'm going to do. Like, so I don't know. There's a lot of ethics here. There's a lot of ethics that people are like.
Well, and I guess it goes back to the again, like the technique perspective of art, where I think moving forward, the things that are going to be most valuable, it's like solving new problems and being creative versus being the best technical draftsman, because
I mean that's always been the case, I think.
Yeah, well, and I guess
they said that at my fucking my commencement speech, I remember.
Oh, man.
And I finished school like 20 years ago. Like it was the same thing. It's like in the future people will rely more on creative problem solving than like, the artists are the ones who are just, you hear it over and over again, you know what I mean? So I think that's always the case. It's like you have to adapt. And you have to and adaptability has to do with how creatively you can think and how much you can think on your feet. And if you have the fucking energy to do it, you might just reach a point where you're like, I'm too old for this shit. I don't care anymore. So, I think everything's always... that's what I'm saying. Like, I don't have a stance on it one way or another. Because you're like, it's so new. I don't know what the hell this is. Like, I understand. Like, it sucks for people who are losing work for it, or for some people that I've seen that are like, their styles are getting stolen. And it's like, that's bullshit. Like, fuck that. That should be something that is, like, clearly, like, now, at the beginning, before it reaches, like, any other step. I think that's absolutely unethical, and it's, like, clearly unethical. And, at the if nothing else, give those people money, like, if you're going to steal it from them.
Right.
But in the broader sense of, like, what does it do in terms of, like, what an artist is, I'm like, I don't know. Who knows?
It's incredibly complicated.
Yeah.
And I guess for anyone that might be threatened by it, it's not necessarily going to be the thing that... Like, there are going to be new problems to solve if your specific way of solving a problem is, like, obsolete,
Yeah, and also, I mean, I guess the other thing I would say is, not to bash too much on programmers, but, like, if social media and a lot of these companies have told us anything, is that, like, the people who create these things aren't necessarily thinking about how it affects everybody. They're only thinking about, like, how cool it is and if it can be monetized and make more money. Yeah. And so that tends to be the thing that worries me more than anything. So, speak up and let people know, and hopefully these assholes will fucking listen to them. Instead of just being like, no, it'll be fine. Democracy will be okay.
Okay,
Yeah, no, we're not radicalizing people. It doesn't matter. Why would somebody become a terrorist? We don't know. Like, just there's people who are like so focused on one side of it that like it is important to have that conversation on the other side of it, just so it's at the very least rounded out. And there are very smart people who are very, intelligent, who can probably make much, much better arguments about, what the problems with it might be further down the line than anybody on Twitter, us just randomly screaming into the void will do.
Yeah.
So that's why I'm like, I don't know. I'm like, there's somebody who's much smarter than me who's probably thought about this.
Well, I think that I've kind of realized, and I'm not being self-deferential or mean to myself when I say this, but I know I'm an idiot.
Yeah.
there's
some of the smartest people know that.
Yeah. Well,
some of the smartest people know that they're not smart.
Yeah. Well, and it's like just looking at the level of things I don't know. It's crazy to me.
Yeah, that's all. It just gets worse as you get older. You're like, oh Jesus, I really don't know anything.
I don't know how to change the oil in my car. Oh shit! Well, and even going beyond that, the world around me is so complex. Just like plumbing is a miracle. The fact that
plumbing's awesome, man.
It's
People
crazy.
Forget how awesome it is to have hot. I took a shower before I came. It was great.
Yeah, it's the best, dude. Well, it's a fucking
I love having
miracle.
a toilet in my house. It's fantastic.
It's magic. It might as well be black magic, right?
Seriously, yeah.
Yeah, it's like no idea how it actually works.
Yeah? No clue.
Yeah.
I'm grateful that someone does.
Yeah. How should people follow you?
Oh, let's see. I'm at Kaveh Taherian on Twitter. I am at PermaFriends on Instagram. My website is blacksmithfilms.com. I'm trying to remember. And I got a podcast. It's called Musical Splaining. You can follow that on Spotify or Apple Podcasts or Google. It's on all of them. I did all the work to make sure they showed up everywhere.
I have a Podbean as well.
Yeah. And then, depending on when you'll release this, but I'm not sure which. My next confirmed convention will be San Diego Comic-Con again.
Awesome. Nice.
I'll be back in Artist Alley, but this will probably come out before then. So.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Cool. Awesome.
Thanks,
it.
Man. Thanks, man. It was lovely to chat with you. Thanks for taking time to hear me out.